Morning and welcome to my webinar. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined in this very hot day. I don't know if you're like me and I'm down south. It is exceptionally hot already. So thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join me for what will be a kind of action-packed 30 minutes of lots of information. I can see lots of people are still joining, so I can see the numbers. So I'll just give everyone a few seconds to join and then we shall begin. I hope everyone is keeping cool and well today. So today's webinar is on the evidence gap and how to demonstrate the real impact of learning. And obviously a really big topic for lots of people at the moment because it's a real challenge for lots of organisations that you're facing at the moment. And it's kind of isn't whether to decide to invest in development, it's actually kind of proving the return that it actually makes. Lots of businesses spend a significant amount of money on like leadership programs and learning platforms, but they're struggling to see the behavioural change and measure performance. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We've got 30 minutes. So let me just take you through what we're going to be looking at. So the aims of the workshop is I'm going to provide you with as much knowledge and information as I can in this 30 minutes. And then I will briefly introduce you to the JP Group methodology. And there will be time allocated at the end. So if you do have any questions, please keep them, put them in the chat, and I'll come to those at the end. So for those of you, I can see lots of new names, which is welcome to those of you who haven't been on one of my webinars or met me previously before, and a huge welcome back to those familiar faces and names that I can see that have joined. So I do appreciate all of those returners. So I'm Jess, I am the CEO of the JP Group. I have been working on developing managers and individuals for 20 years, and I feel super lucky because I get to do a job that I really love because I absolutely love people and making a difference to organisations. So that is me. Please scan if you're on LinkedIn, please connect with me, follow me. I share lots of tips and insights into leadership as my area of expertise. So that is me. There will be some QR codes that I'll bring up again at the end. So if you have your phones ready. So what are we covering today? So the areas I'm going to look at is like why training is failing, why return on investment is difficult, and that kind of moving from activity to business outcome. So quite often the traditional approach is failing, and I need to share with you why that is and how you make that shift to more like business outcome. Those are the aspirations for the next half an hour. Why is this important right now? And it's absolutely essential now more than ever. Organisations are under a huge amount of pressure at the moment. We're in a huge type of change. We're in an unstable economy. And so therefore value for any form of investment really needs to be able to show on some return on investment. HR leaders, and I know we've got a lot of HR professionals joining us today, you are increasingly expected, to connect learning to business performance, retention, and so forth. So we also need to ensure that at the same time managers are leading through this complex change. Dare I say the word AI again, but it's it's our reality at the moment. So that's what we need to ensure that we're kind of looking at the complexity of our world that it is. So we need to make sure that we're looking at real behaviour that drives organizational impact. And if you're in HR, you're needing to be strategic and show this impact. So that's why it's important right now, because we need to be able to demonstrate it. So let me share with you why training falls off. And I run a development business, so yes, I'm saying training alone is not enough, and I'll kind of say that. Training alone really changes performance, and I think this is what we really need to get our head around this morning. So workshops get treated as an event, and this is historically what happens in so many businesses that I've previously worked with. So what happens is they have that workshop, that online module, that leadership day, that conference, and people attend and they feel all motivated and they leave with all these good intentions, and then reality happens. The workload returns, priorities shift, and managers move on to other pressures. So within weeks, it fades and that knowledge isn't transferred into that behavioural change. And I'm sure if I was to say to you, how many of you have seen that training that you felt was successful because everyone initially went, oh, I really enjoyed that day, that was great. And they attended it, but actually in 6 months, what's really changed? And I'm sure lots of you, if you're in HR, will have seen that. You will have spent the money, the happy sheets and the attendance showed it was great. but little actually changed. So let's look at kind of why that happens and moving away from that event. You also need to look at this learning drop off. And yes, that's 90%. That is phenomenally huge. It's forgotten within a month if. So training is great for its short-term motivation. You need the learning for various reasons, and I'll come to that in a moment. But the biggest area isn't actually the development itself. It's what happens afterwards. So that creates that short-term motivation and we come. And then what happens is if we go back to work and then it's not reinforced, there's nowhere for it to land, it will quickly fade. So organizations, they don't build in reflection and coaching and accountability into this process, and therefore no habits are formed, and therefore it will fall away. And this is what we need to look at. So today we'll be talking quite a lot about creating a development pathway as opposed to a one-off event. So where do organizations, and obviously I've seen this a lot, and I speak about this a lot as well, on that people focus on this attendance. So what they're struggling because they typically would go, okay, we've had 20, 30, 40, 50 managers attend, great. Their attendance, their completion rates and their feedback scores. But your CEO should be asking you afterwards, like, shouldn't be saying to, well, they don't say to you, but HR might say, how many people attended the training? But actually your CEO would be asking, well, what's changed? What's improved? The CEOs will be looking for the commercial benefit of that training, not the fact that we can say how many people attended the training course and what the feedback scores were. They don't actually show any change in behaviour. So that's the first thing. We need to move away from focusing on attendance. And then we've got that kind of no baseline. So what we need to be thinking of here is like, what are we measuring? So we're not measuring, so we don't focus on attendance. What are we measuring? What was the baseline? Where did they start off from? This is quite often where people haven't done a measure at the beginning to know like what was or wasn't happening and what levels are they, to make sure that we can see that return from the development initiative. That the objectives I see like very vague, we need to sort of like, support our managers in doing their job well, and there's no measure to that. We need to appreciate that you're not going to see that change the moment no one walks out of a classroom like a whole new person, right? So we need to make sure that actually we're looking at this pathway that I mentioned, that actually we're allowing and giving those tools for people to actually create that behaviour over a period of time. So so the changes that we need to do. So let's activity versus impact. So let's not look at this attendance. There's a real difference between that. Attendance doesn't equal the capability of a manager. Completion doesn't equal behavioural change. And this was my point here. What matters is whether the learning changes and what you've got to think about. So it's not that they've attended. Is decision-making changing? Has communication changed? Has leadership changed? Is accountability? And this is where the real return on investment lies. So we need to switch our thinking from the activity that they've attended to actually what is the impact that we're looking for. So now let's look at actually what creates that behavioural change from this framework. So moving away from the assumptions that people attend training and the learning is that part. And also it's really imperative, by the way, as well. So I'm not here to say that we shouldn't be doing training. That would be very foolish of me. But actually what we do is people don't change because they've heard something once. They change through repetition and it becomes a process and not an event. And that's what I needed everyone to be thinking about today. So first of all, they need the awareness. So why do they go on the learning? So they come on the learning because they need to learn new skills, they need new knowledge, they need new ideas, a new way of thinking. The learning is the starting point and it gives them all of those things. So yes, it is great for that as a starting point to introduce them to all those new concepts and ideas that they need. Then what they need to do is they need to go back to work and practice. And I'm always surprised at how many organisations, they haven't factored this in. They've just sent them on a training course and then they go back to work. And then you're going to get your drop off. So this is really important, particularly with skills when we're looking at management development. If they have been learned or taught in the class how to delegate, how to coach, how to do a difficult conversation, they don't suddenly become proficient because they've practiced it in a training room once. They need that repetition over time. They also need that time to reflect on when they do it. So they go back to work and they have a go and they practice it, and then they need that reflection time to be thinking, what went well? What could I do better? And then what would I do differently next time? And that reflection is really important as well. So growth happens over time. Then they need the applications. They can think about, okay, so now that I can apply that learning, I've realized what I could do better, what could I improve? And this is away from the training room and all of these things happen. They then need to seek feedback on, so that helps people improve faster. So they can then learn on their coaching what they could improve from others. So they've reflected on it from a self point of view. They then need to receive feedback from others. And that plays a huge role in reinforcing behavior day to day. And then you've got the consistency. And it's not about one positive conversation creates culture. A workshop doesn't create the capacity. This is about new behaviors, habits get created because of repetition. So when people always come to me and they say, oh, I lack the confidence, it's just because they haven't done something enough times. So what you really need to be looking at is looking at a framework where you're looking to get return on investment, that we're going to make sure that we're implementing all of these, not just the learning module or event, that those things are factored in to allow people to practice, reflect, apply, gain feedback. And then that consistent approach, that consistency happens because it's what we do again and again and again. And I see these things so often. This is another really important point, and the role of senior leaders. And like everyone is always watching, and organisations take different approaches to development. So let's look at development of our managers. And it's like, well, where are we starting? Do they start with middle managers? Do they start with new managers? Quite often they don't start at the top. And then what happens is that we get the middle managers, or we get the more junior managers come on the training course. And then all I hear and what my team hear is, oh, but this isn't being done above. So it's not being role modelled from above. And the managers reinforce the culture. So it actually fails the training because they go back to work and there's like nowhere for it to land. Like, your managers are your biggest multiplier of the learning effect in an organization. It's a really important part of the development because employees are looking for those cues every day. And I say this a lot to managers. In fact, I was only having this conversation about this week. This week, it's last week actually. Last week I was having a conversation with someone about this because they were in a really difficult, challenging situation, and actually they reacted to defend a team member, but then they were showing the team member that the reaction was the right thing to do, and actually it wasn't. It's because people are looking for their cues, and all he showed to his team member was that actually by shouting and raising my voice, even though it came from a good place, is that's how we behave. So they're looking for those cues. So managers shape the culture, the expectation, the accountability, and the communication and performance standards in a business. So I think you've really got to look at, for your managers, what are they deciding, like what's going to get embedded and what's going to get forgotten? Because when they come back, people are looking for those cues, those reinforcements back in the workplace. So their role is essential. So if you're in HR, you need to get your senior leaders on board with this. Not only that they need to demonstrate the behaviours that you're wanting to change in your workplace, but they're also on board with the supporting element of anyone who's going on the development. Okay. So let's move from the training to the strategy. So where do we start here? So let's start with number one and start with the business challenge. So again, and these are all things that I have seen again and again and again. So this is where organisations just sort of fundamentally shift their thinking. So high-performing organisations, I don't see organisation as that tick box. They kind of see it as much more complex. So what we need to see here is that development is a way to improve performance, leadership capability, culture, engagement, retention. So we've got to see that the development is there to support us with those, not the tick box. So it's not all they need to go on a course. It's actually what do we need to drive. So the traditional approach was much more like training rather than strategic thinking. So what we need to do is making sure that it's not we need leadership training, or communication skills training. It's not that we need that. It's kind of like, why? What's the business problem? This is what I ask all of my clients. Why? Why are you coming to us? Like, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? What behavior needs to change? Like, what impact are you trying to create? And those are the questions that I'm asking every week to our clients, so we make sure that they see that return on investment. So it's not, we need management training. We need to be more strategic in that. Okay, so managers are struggling with accountability. What's happening? We've got managers not delivering the consistent one-to-ones. Like, what's happening in the workplace? Are you losing your talent? So that's what needs to ensure happens. So we then need to sort of like introduce more of a strategic alignment. So when the development is aligned to your business priorities, that's when you're going to start seeing your return on investment. Because now it's like directly connected to the learning, and that's what you really need to see. That's when you see like improved engagement and stronger retention, and reduce those absences as well. So now I'm going to sort of talk about how we demonstrate return on investment, and I've put this in because a lot of HR leaders come to me and they're like, right, we know we need it, and they're sharing all their problems with me. So they get the problems of the business, and they know, and they've moved away from the training, and they totally get that this business needs, but they've got to share their ROI to their CEOs. So it's a real challenge for HR leaders, like translating development into like business language. So because HR naturally would talk about, this is what I hear HR and how they talk to me, is around engagement and well-being and learning and culture. But a CEO would often focus on like productivity, performance and retention, operational effectiveness, growth, risk. So to demonstrate ROI effectively, development needs to be positioned as a business solution, not a people initiative. So when you're wanting to be the strategic HR, talk to your CEOs the way that they're thinking, and that's what they're thinking. So they want a business solution. That's what they want, not a people initiative. So let's start talking to them. Now let's look at a framework for this. This is like my framework to give return on investment. So once like development is actually aligned to your business priorities, the next sort of challenge becomes, how do we demonstrate this ROI in a credible, meaningful way? And this is really important. So HR teams can struggle because development can seem like a lack of value. So if we have a clear demonstrate to communicate this will really help you with that. So the first point is starting with your business challenge. So when you're presenting it to your CEO, it's like, right, what is the biggest challenge? So the first step is to make sure that we can position that. This is like one of the biggest mindset shifts that I recommend that organizations take. So develop courses with like kind of actually what's not working. So if we can get this is the business needs, what's not working at the moment, what business do we need to improve and what do we need to impact? And start with that. And I have already mentioned that, but I wanted to keep repeating these things because they're really important. So that's what we need to learn. And then we're going to look at driving the behaviour change. So once the challenge is clear, the next step is like to identify the behaviours that need to change. So we know what our challenge is. What behaviour do we need? So this is ultimately business outcome improves when people do things differently. So then we need to recognise and define that behaviour of what you're actually looking for. So let's make sure we're saying that. So you might say that business problems, an example of this could be your business problem is that we've got an issue with our engagement. So what's the behaviour that you need your managers to be doing to increase behaviour? So if the challenge is the engagement, your managers need to start doing giving feedback, having meaningful one-to-one. So those are the behaviours that you need to start seeing. And that's really important. So you can see the link there that you can then bring that back. And I see this as a mistake that people don't often do this. So you need to make sure that we're then linking the behaviour change to the business outcomes. Here's where HR can like really become more commercially influential if you can do these things. So the key is there like to connect the two. So connect that business change to it. So making sure that we do that. And this is where you're going to see your real return. You've got to be able to like have a commercially strong statement that your CEOs are going to listen to. So they're not going to invest in training itself. They're going to look on the business outcome. So that's what you need to create for them. So return on investment, like what's the measure? What are we seeing? There's massive costs to this stuff not happening. That's also a really good way. So actually, if we're looking at, right, if we can reduce absenteeism and we can reduce turnover costs and improve productivity, then that's a real measure of your return on investment. So if they start doing these different behaviours, this is then it will link to the business outcome that we're trying to achieve, which is like our growth. And then we can measure it because these things won't be happening. And that's where you get your return. So these are questions that I always like. I put a few questions here. So questions your CEOs like will ask, like, what's the business problem we're solving? What behavior needs changing? So I prepare yourselves. Like if you're sitting here and you're in HR, like actually like have these prepared and come with these like to your HR. So this is these questions I've put up sort of like to support you thinking more like a CEO. So that most HRs naturally, as I've said, already focus on the kind of well-being and the people initiatives rather than the kind of growth and measurement. So actually, if you can ask these questions, this will help you like position yourself more strategically, and that's really important. The cost of poor leadership, and I just started to talk about this a couple of slides back, so this is really important to talk about. There is a lot of cost in a business to poor leadership, we don't often sort of talk about it, or it like might not even turn up on your balance sheets and your accounts, but actually you can the data is really available now. We have a wonderful thing called AI which can give you some data on these, but the cost of losing your talent and re-recruiting them, so high turnover, and even if it's not high turnover, it's just turnover of people where you're losing people for the wrong reasons, is a really, talk about how people lose managers, people leave businesses, they don't leave businesses, they leave managers. And actually, I slightly challenge that way of thinking. So this turnover about they're leaving their poor managers. Actually, I look at your organisation for that, because I think quite often it's more complex than just leaving a manager. It's usually that the organisation hasn't actually given the manager the tools and the skills. So I think a lot of organisations are actually accountable for that poor management if you haven't equipped them to be able to do a good job. Losing your talent for those reasons is hugely costly. And actually, at the moment, I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and they've got positions available, and they are just not getting the quality of applicants in. So actually, you may well struggle to replace these people. Lower engagement impacts, and I think you've got to think, okay, if we've got lower engagement, what impact does that have? And this is really important that we're thinking about it, because it's not just thinking we've got it, but actually that how people feel affects how they work. So when it's leading to I'm disengaged, that's going to affect morale. It's affecting performance. So these things have a cost. When people aren't as productive as they should be, or you would expect them to be, there's a cost to that. So disengagement, switching off, people aren't as creative, they're not as innovative, they're not turning up for things, they're not putting their hand up for things. People are going to go off sick more often. We've got an issue with our productivity. And yes, you'll have more ER issues to deal with as well. So there is a lot of cost. So sometimes to go to your CEOs as well, that actually this is the cost if we don't fix these problems, which is massive. Okay. So that is what I wanted to share with you on some of those slides. So let's just sort of talk about do a recap. So on some of these points. So training alone isn't enough. Training fails because it is seen as a standalone event and not part of a development pathway. So what we need to do is that we're making sure that it's part of a process, and then we're actually thinking that the learning is a really important part, and so is the practice, the reflection, the feedback, the application, to allow consistency back in the workplace. So to get behavioural change, people need repetition, and they need those elements. They don't walk out of a training room a whole new person. So we need to be looking at development pathways and not single events. Then it's difficult to demonstrate if you're looking at the wrong things. So it's looking at that attendance, those happy sheets, that, oh, did you enjoy it? Yeah, it was a great day. Learning isn't about whether they're yes, I think it's really important. People do learn it because you want them to be motivated. When they leave, they've got to be inspired. What you need to be taking is harnessing that motivation and then moving that into the pathway so that you can see the change. So don't stop looking at that activity of training, workshops, and move towards business outcomes. And the business outcomes can be that we're wanting growth and higher performance. Business outcomes, well, how do we achieve that? What behaviours do we need to see in the workplace that are going to allow that? So you work on driving the behavioural change that lead to your business outcomes. That's what I've been talking about today. And that only decides when you're actually going to make it happen. So we can sit here, we can plod on doing the same. I hope something has really resonated with you today, where you're thinking, do you know what? We do that, we fall into these traps, and what are you going to do about it? And I think that's what it is. One of my questions would be to you is, would you work for all of your managers? And if you wouldn't, then something needs to be done about it. A process, we need to do it. What I am going to do, I've just got literally 2 slides just to share with you around my methodology that I've created, which sort of links to everything we've talked about today. I'm going to offer everyone who's attended today a half-hour chat with myself to discuss your requirements and what you're looking for. And I will also get your phones out if you need a QR code. I'll bring this up on other slides if you're not quite ready before I move on. What I wanted to introduce you to was our JP Learning Loop. And this is our methodology to all of our training. So what we say is when someone comes on a training course with us, they effectively receive a loop, and we have a loop methodology. So they come on a training program with us. We also have benchmark our training. So there'll be skills matrix beforehand and so forth. So everything is benchmarked and measured. So what sits outside of this loop is measurement. So we do the learning, and that's where they learn their skills and their knowledge and their new insights. And that's what that's great for. And then we will give them tools to apply it back in the workplace. And then we will give them learning logs for them to reflect in, and the support. So our management development programs come with coaching support sessions so that they can get that help of what's gone well from the practice and the application, what's gone well, where were the difficulties, and really support them in that. And we also set up peer-to-peer coaching sessions, peer-to-peer support groups for those, and ensure that they're getting check-ins with their managers as well. So that's our approach, and this is how we know development works. We don't do tick box training. What we do is we create a development pathway for each and every course. So we do learning loops. It's what we do. This is just a snapshot of our transformational leadership program, so you can just see how that works in practice. This is the only other slide I'm showing you. So what we do with our management development transformation program is that we have at the start there's engagement surveys. So we partner with Coefficient, and we do engagement surveys, and we do skills matrix as all part of our onboarding to set our measurement. And then you can see that each of the loops, they're a module where there is a learning. So the first module is leadership and management. We've got all the content that goes with that, and that's a loop. And then what that looks like is that they'll do the training, they go back to work, they do the application, the reflection, get their coaching session, and then a month later they come back for more learning. And so we're going to be developing these over a period of time, because that repetition is what builds the behavioural change. And then at the end, after a period of a month, we then reassess and get certifications as well. This is an accredited programme for the Institute of Leadership as well. This is just one of the many courses and programmes that we offer, just to give you an insight into what we're doing. There are some of our happy learners. That's me, one of them. We get fantastic feedback. So if any of you are needing case studies, we have those available from all of the people, the 5-star ratings that we've received from all of our clients over the time. There's another opportunity for you to scan the QR code, and I'm going to finish up with the last card because I did promise you questions. We've got half an hour, so I wanted to make sure that now I can move to questions. I'm just going to look in the chat and see if anyone has put anything in so far. So please put in the chat if you had any questions at this point. I really hope that you've enjoyed this session and found it useful. Our development programs, we tend to work in small groups because we're not tick box. So we work with groups of about 8 managers at a time, sometimes up to 10. If you've got like 20 managers or 30 managers, we can go to 10. We don't work with groups of 15 people because we're not tick box. We need to make sure that everyone has the ability to practice, contribute and participate, because we're about driving behavioural change. So that was a question that I often get asked. Where possible, I would recommend that these initiatives are done face-to-face. We do work with global clients, so sometimes they're done virtually, or there's a combination of the two. We can also bring in some blended learning activities if you wish between sessions. You're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. See if there's anything else. So yeah, jump off if you haven't got any questions, but I'm here to thank you for all the kind comments. I'm glad you found it useful. Please scan a QR code if you are interested in having a chat with me, and also connect with me on LinkedIn. I look forward to continuing our conversations and supporting you. You're very welcome. Okay, so all I can say now is we're down to the last 20 seconds. of the session, but please stay safe in this heat, and thank you very much for joining in this very hot weather. I look forward to seeing you on a webinar soon. So thank you very much for joining. Has anyone got any questions?